take a quick look at this picture and think about what it suggests. This is the Emancipation Memorial in Washington, D.C., and it seems to perpetuate a flawed view of history that so many people have about different movements and different things that have happened in history. As you can see, it suggests that Lincoln is bestowing freedom upon the slave there, when in reality there's a lot of sort of pushing forces for him to do so. Now, this not to discredit, of course, Lincoln did play a major role in pushing the 13th Amendment through that abolished slavery. But even during the Civil War, African Americans played a very crucial role in changing the outcome of the war, whether through actual fighting on the Union side, but also through challenging slaveholders in the South. So that we're not talking about the Civil War, but it's just a way of viewing history. I got my Lincoln history buff shirt on, by the way, to match that. But today we're going to talk about the U.S. civil rights movements and its international connections. So go along with this theme that freedom is not bestowed by political leaders in many cases at all. So, for instance, in Raleigh, during the sit-in movement, a group of black students from Shaw University went and sat down at a lunch counter, and up come some local whites and set 3 bullets down on the counter, and so trying to intimidate them. But they carried on and they pushed through and they continued with the sit-in movement. Another example in Greensboro, the site of the Greensboro Four, where 4 students sat at the Woolworth lunch counter to challenge the segregated practices there. So in this city, members of the North Carolina A&T football team would often accompany the demonstrators and be part of the demonstrations as well, as a sort of buffer to deter potential violence. But one of the local whites came up to one of them and said, "Who do you think you are?" Doing these protests. "Who do you think you are?" And he said, "We're the Union Army." Right? And so they were making this connection to the past, changing things. But whether it's in Raleigh or Greensboro or different places in America, the activists really had to push. It was not a matter of John F. Kennedy or Lyndon Johnson, just getting up and saying, "We need to change things." They were really being pushed to do so. So political leaders rarely bestow freedom on people. So as far as the international connections to the civil rights movement in the United States and to other places, we've mentioned the importance of, for instance, Kwame Nkrumah and the movement in Ghana. So many of the civil rights activists in America viewed him as sort of a symbolic hero to the rights of black people around the world. Of course, they were inspired by Gandhi and nonviolent resistance. So, when we think of Gandhi, it's not just that he was nonviolent. I'm standing here being nonviolent, but I'm not changing the world, right? So you can be, part of it was, of course, nonviolence. You stuck with that. But it's also challenging laws that you feel are immoral and unjust. And that's, at the essence of civil disobedience. So in the United States, and of course we're kind of comparing things to Cuba. We've talked about Cuba recently. So United States, it's important to understand it's really a social movement that seeks political and economic changes. So the civil rights movement in the 50s and 60s, again, the social movement, and it's trying to push politicians into making changes, but it's also trying to change the sort of moral viewpoint and economic changes as well. Trying to pressure businesses to allow people to work at their establishments, or promoting people and that sort of thing. Now in Cuba, though, it's almost the opposite in a lot of ways. It's a political movement. When Castro came into power, he did indeed eliminate a lot of the most egregious forms of discrimination. But on the flip side of that, he also wouldn't really allow any social activism to push further. So, there is that connection. Now, many of the black nationalists in America in the late 1960s that sort of were fed up with maybe the mainstream civil rights movement, a lot of the black nationalists in the late 60s actually identified with Cuba. That they were challenging capitalism itself and really the American system of economy. They often identified their conditions, for black people living in rough sections of cities. They felt they were almost living in a colonial society. So many of the black nationalists did identify with Cuba and sort of looked up to Castro, but not surprisingly, when a lot of them did go to Cuba, they became disillusioned and they started to realize that Cuba was certainly no racial paradise. It was no, even though there had been some changes, there still existed racism in Cuba. So a lot of these sort of black radicals, Stokely Carmichael, Robert F. Williams, Eldridge Cleaver of the Black Panthers. A lot of these people that went to Cuba for a brief period realized it was not what they maybe had expected it to be. So ultimately, just to wrap this up, Cuba sort of teaches us a lesson about the way we can view even American civil rights movement or other movements for civil or human rights throughout the world. Mark Sawyer, basically, the political scientist, says that it really takes a mix of state activism and social activism to produce changes to eliminate racial equality. In the United States, you had a social movement to try to push political changes. In Cuba, they were not allowing social activism, and you see that the changes were not maybe as strong as they could have been. So that it really requires social activism along with political activism to really create significant changes. All right, have a good one.